The Galactic Council had ruled over 1,000 star systems for centuries. They controlled trade, war, and diplomacy. Their archives held records of every known species, every war, every empire that had risen and fallen. But among the millions of reports and files, there was one name that always seemed like a joke: humans. They were nothing more than a myth, a forgotten species that had vanished long ago. Many scholars believed that humans had never really existed. The few records that did mention them were filled with impossible stories, tales of strength beyond reason, of wars where they stood against impossible odds and still won, of battles where a single human ship could fight an entire armada. For centuries, alien scholars debated about humans. Some thought they had been an experiment by some ancient race. Others said they had wiped themselves out. A few believed that humans had never been real at all, just a story made up to scare children. Among the many powerful civilizations, the Xivar Dominion was the strongest. Their empire stretched across galaxies. Their war fleets had destroyed hundreds of worlds. No one dared to challenge them. High Commander Varlock, leader of the Xivar war fleets, sat on his throne inside his massive battleship, the Doomfang. His crimson armor reflected the dim lights of the war chamber. In front of him, a holographic map showed the known galaxy. "Tell me," Varlock growled, his voice deep and menacing. "What is this nonsense I hear about a forgotten species?" One of his advisors, a thin, insectoid alien named Trelzik, hesitated before speaking. "My lord, the legends of humans, they have been dismissed as superstition." But, Varlock's eyes narrowed. Trelzik swallowed hard. "We've detected something near the old star system where humans were supposed to live. Strange signals, unidentified energy patterns." Varlock leaned forward. "Are you telling me that this myth is real?" Trelzik quickly shook his head. "No, my lord. Humans are not real. But whatever is in that system, it is not natural. And it is old." Varlock sat back and laughed. "Humans are legends for fools. We will take our fleet there and see for ourselves. If there is anything of value, it will belong to the Xivar Dominion." The order was given. Within hours, 1,000 Xivar warships set course for the long-forgotten system. They were armed with planet-destroying weapons, confident that nothing could challenge them. But as they approached the ancient system, something strange happened. The stars seemed darker. Their sensors glitched. And then, an old Earth transmission activated. A deep, broken voice spoke through the static. "You should not have come here." The Xivar fleet drifted into the ancient system, their massive warships gliding past cold, dead planets. The system's central star was weak, barely glowing. Asteroids floated like silent watchers, as if waiting for something. High Commander Varlock sat on the bridge of the Doomfang, watching the holographic display. His warships moved like hungry beasts, scanning the system for any signs of life. "Where did that transmission come from?" Varlock demanded. His sensor officer, a reptilian alien named Kryn, tapped furiously at his control panel. His scales glowed a nervous yellow. The signal, it came from the third planet. Varlock's eyes narrowed. "Show me." The hologram shifted, revealing a ruined planet covered in darkness. It was lifeless. No cities, no movement, just broken landscapes and deep scars on the surface. Yet despite the destruction, something about it felt wrong. Trelzik, the insectoid advisor, clicked his mandibles. That was the homeworld of humans. Earth. The bridge fell silent. Earth. The legendary world. The place of myths. The place that should not exist anymore. Varlock laughed, his voice booming. "This is the great human world. It's nothing but a graveyard. A dead rock." Kryn hesitated. "Sir, there's more. We tried scanning the planet, but something is blocking us." Varlock frowned. "Blocking us? Impossible." Trelzik leaned closer. "There are stories, Commander. Stories that say humans left something behind. A warning. A weapon. Varlock growled. Superstitions. He turned to his fleet officers. Prepare the landing forces. I want boots on that planet now. If there's anything of value, it will belong to the Zivar Dominion. The order was given. Warships descended toward Earth. Dropships roared through the thick, unnatural clouds. Varlock himself stood at the front, leading his elite soldiers as they touched down on the cold, cracked surface. The moment they stepped onto the ground, everything went silent. No wind, no sound, no movement. The ruins of a once mighty civilization stretched before them. Towers lay in pieces. Roads were buried under dust and debris. Strange symbols, written in an unknown language, were carved into stone walls. Then Kryn's voice came through the communicator, shaky and weak. "Commander, something is moving beneath us." Varlock clenched his fists. "Show me." The ground rumbled. Cracks split the earth. The dust shifted. And then they heard it. A voice. Low, deep, ancient. "You were warned." The ruins began to glow. Strange machines, hidden beneath the surface for centuries, came to life. The Zivar warriors raised their weapons, but it was too late. The ground collapsed beneath them, swallowing them whole into the darkness below. And then, for the first time in his life, High Commander Varlock felt something he had never known before. The dust had barely settled when Varlock hit the ground. His armored suit absorbed most of the impact, but the moment he tried to stand, pain shot through his leg. Something was broken, but he had no time to worry about it. Around him, his soldiers groaned, trying to recover from the sudden fall. The cavern they had dropped into was massive, stretching beyond what their lights could reach. Strange, glowing lines ran along the walls, pulsing with an eerie blue light. The air was thick, not with dust, but with something unnatural, something that made their scales itch and their antennae twitch. Kryn coughed, lifting his visor. "Commander, what is this place?" Varlock ignored him. He activated his communicator. "Trelzik, respond." Static. The transmission was dead. His fleet, his ships, his officers above. There was no answer. A cold feeling crept into his chest. He turned to his soldiers. "Weapons ready. We move." Now. They spread out cautiously, their plasma rifles glowing in the dark. The cavern wasn't just a natural formation. It was built. The smooth metallic walls, the strange symbols, the silent machines embedded in the rock. Then they saw it. A massive door stood at the far end of the cavern. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Not Zivar, not Stelvari, not of any known species. And in the center of the door, a human skull, carved in black stone, with hollow, staring eyes. Kryn's scales turned pale. "This is a tomb." Varlock growled. "Nonsense. This is a vault." His mind raced. If this was some kind of lost human structure, there had to be technology here. Weapons, data, power. He stepped closer, reaching out. And the moment his claw touched the door, it spoke. A voice, deep, emotionless, and filled with something that made their blood run cold. "You should not have come." Then the ground shook violently. Lights exploded to life in the cavern, casting long, unnatural shadows. The walls shifted, and suddenly, they were not alone. Shapes emerged from the darkness. Figures, humanoid but not alive. They had human skulls, but their bodies were metal, their eyes burning with red light. Their arms were weapons, ancient, deadly-looking, glowing with an energy that should not exist anymore. Kryn gasped. "Humans? No, they can't be. They're machines." Varlock had heard whispers of old stories. The myths spoke of human experiments, merging minds with machines, creating warriors that could never die. Those were just stories, weren't they? One of the metal warriors raised its arm. A glowing blue weapon charged up, and in that moment, Varlock understood. This was not a tomb. This was not a vault. This was a battlefield, and they had awakened something that was never meant to wake up again. A deafening blast tore through the cavern as the first human warform opened fire. The Zyvar soldiers screamed as the pass came back to destroy them. Varlok barely had time to react before the blast hit the ground in front of him. The shockwave threw him backward, his armor scraping against the metallic floor as sparks flew around him. His visor flickered, struggling to recalibrate. Screams filled the cavern. His soldiers, his elite warriors, were being torn apart by something they didn't understand. The metal warriors, the human warforms, moved like shadows of death. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They simply hunted, their glowing red eyes locking onto targets before unleashing blue-white energy blasts that vaporized anything they hit. Kryn had managed to take cover behind a fallen support beam, his plasma rifle shaking in his claws. He fired wildly, his bolt slamming into one of the metal figures. The shots did nothing. The machine turned toward him, its skull-like face unblinking, and raised its arm. A whine of charging energy filled the air. "Kryn, move," Varlok roared. Kryn dived just as a beam of light sliced through the air where he had been. The heat was so intense that the ground beneath it melted into liquid metal. Varlok forced himself to his feet, grabbing his fallen rifle. He had seen battles before, wars, invasions, planetary sieges. But this was different. This wasn't a battle. It was annihilation. He turned toward the massive door, the one with the human skull carved into it. They had activated something when they touched it. If this was a vault, there had to be a way to seal it again. "Fall back," he barked. Only a handful of his soldiers were still standing. The rest, gone. Kryn scrambled over to him. "Commander, we have to retreat. We have to." The machine stopped. All at once, every metal warrior stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed forward. The cavern fell into an eerie silence. Varlok's breathing was heavy. He could still hear the crackling of energy from the melted ground, the distant echoes of their own panicked movements. Then, a deep mechanical voice filled the cavern. "You were warned." The voice did not belong to any of the metal warriors. It came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the very walls of the ancient structure. The door behind them rumbled. The massive skull carving shifted, its hollow eyes suddenly glowing blue. Then the voice spoke again. "This place is not for the living." A low, vibrating hum filled the air. The temperature dropped. The Zyvar warriors could feel it. Something beyond their understanding was waking up. Varlok had to act. Now. He turned toward the door, scanning for any control panel, any mechanism. There, a console embedded in the wall, covered in symbols not Zyvar, not Selvari, not from any known race. He moved quickly, his claws hovering over the controls. His mind raced. If this was human technology, it shouldn't even work anymore. The humans were gone, wiped from the stars long ago. Yet here it was, alive, watching them. Kryn's voice was frantic. "Commander, what are you doing? We need to leave before." The machines moved again, not to attack. They turned their heads, all of them, toward the door. The blue glow in the skull's eyes intensified, and suddenly, the door began to open. A deep hiss filled the chamber as ancient air rushed out from within. A thick fog seeped from the widening gap, rolling across the metallic floor like a living thing. Then, a figure stepped forward. Tall, broad, armored in black metal, smooth and seamless like a second skin. The helmet was featureless, except for two piercing blue lights where eyes should be. And on its chest, glowing with the same eerie energy, was a symbol, an ancient earth insignia. The Zyvar warriors froze in terror. Varlok's breath caught in his throat. The human warforms that had been attacking them just moments ago. They knelt, all of them, as if paying respect. Varlok's mind screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Then the armored figure spoke. Its voice was deep, cold, Not machine, not entirely human. Something more. You should not have come here. A second figure stepped from the shadows. Then a third. Varlock realized the truth too late. Humanity was never wiped out. They had only been waiting. And now, they were awake. The cavern was deathly silent. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Varlock's claws clenched around his weapon. But he knew it wouldn't help. Not against this. The armored figures stood motionless, their glowing blue eyes locked onto the Zivar invaders. The kneeling warforms around them remained absolutely still, as if waiting for a command. The first figure, the one who had spoken, stepped forward. His movements were unnatural, not stiff like a machine, but too smooth, too controlled. The armor made no sound as it moved, and the way the shadows clung to him made it seem as if he were not entirely there. Varlock's mind raced. What were these things? Were they truly human? Humans were supposed to be gone, wiped from existence. Nothing remained of their empire except ruins and old warnings. And yet, here they were. The second figure turned its head slightly, observing the Zivar warriors like a scientist studying insects. Then the first one spoke again. You have entered the vault of the forgotten. You should not be here. His voice wasn't like the mechanical warforms. It was something else, a voice layered with an unnatural echo, as if multiple voices spoke at once. Kryn took a step back, his breathing ragged. Commander, we need to leave. Now. Varlock agreed, but he didn't dare move. Any sudden action might be a death sentence. Then the blue-eyed figure raised a hand. At once, the warforms stood up, their red eyes flashing as they prepared to strike. Wait, Varlock roared, throwing down his rifle. We did not come here to fight. The figure stopped, tilting its head slightly, as if considering his words. You broke the seal. Varlock had no idea what that meant, but he answered anyway. It was an accident. We did not know. Ignorance does not absolve you, the figure interrupted. Kryn's claws tightened around his weapon. He was terrified. They all were. Then, without warning, the entire cavern shook. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the walls, vibrating through their bones. One of the other figures spoke for the first time. It is awake. The warforms turned in unison, looking toward the deeper tunnels of the vault. A low, unnatural hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The walls began to glow, ancient symbols pulsing with blue energy. Kryn's voice was barely a whisper. Commander, what have we done? Varlock didn't have an answer. The first armored figure turned back to them, his glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. You should not have come here, he repeated. Then the ground split open. A deep chasm ripped through the floor, blue light spilling from within. The Zivar warriors stumbled back as an immense presence filled the air, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. A voice, not spoken, but felt, rippled through their minds. Who dares wake me? The armored figures did not react. They simply turned toward the chasm, kneeling as one. Varlock's heart pounded. The Zivar Empire had spent centuries mocking human myths. Now he realized the truth. Humanity had not died. It had become something else, and whatever they had just awakened was beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. The cavern trembled. The chasm in the ground pulsed with an eerie blue light, and from its depths came a presence, something ancient, something awake. Varlock tried to move, tried to pull his warriors back, but his body refused to obey. It was as if an unseen force had locked him in place. The armored figures remained kneeling, completely still. The red-eyed warforms stood at attention, waiting. Then something rose from the chasm. At first, it was just a shadow, stretching unnaturally, warping the space around it. Then the light from the walls caught a shape, and what Varlock saw made his blood run cold. It was human, or at least it had been. A towering figure, clad in black armor that shimmered like liquid void, stepped forward. Its helmet was smooth, featureless, except for two burning blue slits where eyes should have been. A long, flowing cloak of darkness trailed behind it, shifting as if it were alive. The air grew heavier, and the Zivar warriors collapsed to their knees. The weight of this being's presence was too much. It was like being crushed beneath an entire planet. Varlock tried to breathe, but his lungs refused to work properly. The figure spoke, and its voice did not come from its mouth, but from everywhere at once, inside their heads, inside their bones. "You have disturbed the slumber of the forgotten." Kryn let out a strangled gasp. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question. Then it took another step forward, and the cavern walls reacted, glowing brighter. "We are what remains of the First War, the war that ended your gods." Varlock's heart pounded. The First War. The oldest stories of the galaxy spoke of it. A time before the great empires, before recorded history. A war so devastating that entire civilizations vanished, leaving behind only ruins and whispers. The Zivar Empire had always dismissed it as myth. But standing before him was proof that the myths had been real. And worse, humanity had been part of it. The figure's gaze swept over them. "You are not the first to come here. Others have tried. They did not leave." A horrible realization sank into Varlock's mind. The ruins scattered across the galaxy, the lost expeditions, the missing fleets, they hadn't disappeared. They had come here, and they had never returned. Kryn, still gasping under the crushing pressure, managed to whisper, "Why are you still here?" The armored figure stood silent for a moment. Then it spoke words that sent a chill down Varlock's spine. "Because the war never ended." The cavern shook violently, and the chasm behind the figure exploded with energy. Ghostly shapes, humanoid but wrong, rose from the depths, their eyes glowing with cold fury. The warforms activated, their bodies shifting into battle stances. Varlock realized then, they were not prisoners in this vault. They were an army waiting for their time to return. And now, because the Zivar Empire had been foolish enough to disturb them, the war was about to begin again. Varlock struggled to stand, but his body felt like it was sinking under an invisible force. His warriors were frozen in fear, their weapons clutched tightly, but none dared to raise them. The warforms stood at attention, their red eyes glowing brighter. The armored figure before them remained still, as if waiting for something. Then the cavern shuddered again. The chasm behind the figure pulsed with blinding blue energy, and more shadows began to rise. Ghostly, humanoid figures that shimmered like distortions in reality itself. The war never ended. The voice came again, surrounding them, drilling into their bones. The armored figure stepped forward, and as it did, the walls of the cavern began shifting. Symbols that had been lifeless carvings now glowed, and massive doors as tall as warships, began to slide open. Beyond them lay an armory of nightmares. The Zivar Empire had never seen technology like this. Dark metal warships, sleek and lined with glowing veins of power, hung in silent readiness. Rows upon rows of battle armor stood, waiting, as if the soldiers who once wore them had simply vanished, leaving their weapons behind. And yet, Varlock could feel them. They were not gone. They were still here. Somewhere, somehow, these warriors had not died. They had simply been waiting. Kryn gasped. This is a tomb." The armored figure turned its glowing eyes to him. "No, this is a warning." A deep rumble shook the cavern. The ghostly figures rising from the chasm began to solidify. Their bodies, once flickering shadows, were now clad in the same dark armor as the figure before them. They turned their heads in unison, their glowing blue eyes locking onto the Zivar warriors. Varlock gritted his teeth. What do you want?" The figure tilted its head slightly. "You came looking for myths. Now you faced the truth." The pressure in the air thickened. The Zivar soldiers gasped for breath. their knees buckling under an unseen weight. The warforms, still frozen in place, suddenly activated, their mechanical limbs whirring as their weapons snapped forward, aimed at the Zyvar forces. Kryn's claws clenched around his weapon. We made a mistake. Yes, the figure interrupted. The walls blazed with light. A hum filled the chamber, deep, ancient, powerful. And then, the entire underground structure began to rise. The Zyvar warriors stumbled as the cavern itself lifted from the ground. No, it wasn't just a cavern. It was a ship, a colossal warship buried beneath the surface for untold millennia. Outside, on the planet's surface, the Zyvar fleet had been waiting for orders. They had watched as their ground team disappeared into the ruins, expecting a quick conquest. Instead, they saw the impossible. The land split open, and a massive structure, dark, ancient, and humming with power, began to ascend into the sky. From its hull, thousands of glowing blue lights flickered on. Engines, weapons, shields, systems waking after countless ages of silence. The Zyvar ships panicked. Unknown vessel detected. It's impossible. Where did that come from? Prepare to fire. But then, before they could react, the sky darkened. A fleet appeared above them, materializing out of nowhere. Silent, black warships, their hulls marked with symbols that had not been seen in 1,000 years. They had never left. The moment the Zyvar forces had disturbed the vault, the Forgotten had begun to awaken. On board the rising warship, Varlok and his remaining warriors felt the full weight of their mistake. You wanted to know what became of humanity. The armored figure stepped forward one last time, the hum of the ship growing louder around them. Now you will learn. Outside, the Zyvar fleet tried to flee. They never got the chance. The Forgotten fleet opened fire, and the stars burned once more.